no matter how good things get or no matter how bad things get, it's just an experience and it's a part of a bigger picture. And if you can hold that and, see rejection as redirection and see,
Nice.
these kind of things, yeah, life is a collection of days, and not to get hung up on how things are today. Everything can change overnight.
Hi, I'm the self-development coach, Johnny Lawrence, and welcome to the Self-Development Podcast. Time and time again, the people I work with say the same thing to me. You have to meet Pat Divilly. You're both so aligned in your beliefs, your approaches, similar outlooks, and I'd love to listen to you on a podcast. Well, today I have the pleasure of speaking with the incredible Pat Divilly. Pat has been involved in the wellness space for over 15 years now. He started in the fitness industry before moving into mental, emotional, and relational wellness. He hosts the popular podcast, the Pat Divilly Podcast, and is the author of the #1 bestseller, Fit Mind. Pat also frequently delivers workshops, online programs, and retreats designed to support emotional healing, connection, and authentic living. How are you today, Pat?
I'm really well, man. That's nice to hear that there's a desire for us to come together and chat. So yeah, happy to get to do this.
Mate, honestly, I really, I admire you, if I'm honest. I think that your story is powerful. I think the way that you speak is really impactful. And I think you speak sense. There's this weird thing out there, this masculinity that men have to be a certain way, and it's being challenged, definitely. But is it? Because sometimes I think people say stuff, but actually they don't actually practice it. But you are one of those people who are leading by example, and I admire that. I really do.
Thank you. That means a lot. Yeah, thank you.
No, it's true. It's all true. I actually went to your website for the first time the other day and saw that little documentary that you've got on there. Yeah. That's a really nice documentary. How old is that?
Belief and Belonging. I think that's pre-pandemic, just before the pandemic. I think that was filmed. Yeah, it was a nice little project. Yeah, it was cool.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you. I mean, that's partly part of the admiration. Really, it comes from your honesty. Because there's some stuff in there that a lot of men wouldn't admit to feeling. And I think that, and one of the questions we're going to ask later is about getting honest with yourself, because I think that sometimes for men that's the barrier. It's that difference between how we feel we should show up and how we actually want to show up in the world. And there's that little space in between that's terrifying, it's dark, it's unknown, it's unpredictable. And understandably, men want to stay the hell away from that, because that's where all the tears are, that's where all the shame are, that's where all the insecurities are. And that's difficult. That's very, very difficult. But I'm skipping a beat here. So let's start with for those people that might not have come across you yet, could you just tell people a bit about yourself and your journey so far?
Yeah, as you mentioned, I started out in the fitness industry. So growing up, I struggled a little bit with bullying and feeling like an outsider, I suppose. I was quite sensitive and that didn't land too well with others. And so I had a lot of insecurity growing up, kind of sense of like not being enough, not being of any value, all this kind of stuff. And a lot of that drove an overachiever in me, I suppose. In my teens, I started practicing martial arts. I started weight training and I found confidence for the first time. And so that led me to pursuing fitness as a profession. I failed with my first business pretty miserably up in Dublin. I lived there for a little while and just couldn't get my feet off the ground with the business there. And I came back to my hometown of Galway at 24 with a great deal of shame, having to move back in with my parents. And I mean, in retrospect, I say, geez, you're only 24. It's not a big deal. But at the time, that kind of overachiever that wanted to be somebody really felt like I had failed, because everyone told me there's no industry in Ireland for fitness. You're not going to make a profession from this. And I was adamant I was, and here I was going back, having failed. But I started again on my local beach here in Galway with outdoor fitness classes, just to kind of have something to do. And I was working in a pizza restaurant then on the side. And something happened where I I guess, sharing my struggles and sharing my unique way of teaching fitness, the classes grew very quickly and my life completely changed. In a year, I had 500 clients. Inside of 4 years, 20,000 clients through online training courses, and a lot changed. I wrote books in training and nutrition. I built a gym, or not built a gym, but I owned a gym. But funnily, when I got to 28, I'd kind of ticked all the boxes that I was convinced would make me happy. So I bought a house and a car. I met a great girlfriend, amazing friends and family, and I still was struggling. I was moving very fast in my 20s, and I think part of that was like high functioning anxiety, like not wanting to slow down and acknowledge what I was struggling with. And so kind of overnight, I walked away from the fitness side of things and I tried to figure myself out a bit and studied meditation and breath work and cognitive behavioral therapy, logotherapy, Jungian therapy, every type of therapy under the sun. And the last 8 years has been more about sharing what I'm learning in the mental space, the emotional space, the relational space, through story, through personal examples. And I think what I realized as I've gotten older is that, when I was young, it was obvious that physical fitness, we need to do things consistently to develop our capacity. But with mental and emotional wellness, I'd always kind of assumed you're either a happy person or you're not. And I thought it was kind of the roll of the dice. But I've learned over time that we're all going to have struggles. We're all going to have challenges. We can't control 99% of things out there, but what we can control is, how we look after ourselves and the things that we do to hopefully nurture kind of an empowering mindset. So yeah, my passion now is mental, emotional, and relational wellness.
Oh man, there's so much there that I'm curious about. This is what I meant about never being able to stay to the 45 minutes. I'm just curious, like, where do you think that very early year insecurity came from? What was it?
I believe that the first 7 years of our life really are the blueprint of how we see ourselves and how we see the world. So is that interesting example sometimes shared that if you've got two sons that grow up with an alcoholic father, one might make the association that that's just the norm, and so they become an alcoholic too. I'm just like my father. And then the other might never have a drink in his life, and you ask him why he doesn't drink, and he'll say, I don't want to be like my father. So I think how we perceive our early childhood experiences really can shape how we show up. And I think the bullying and feeling left out sort of made me feel like I'm not enough, I'm not of value, I'm not good at team sports, I'm not one of the lads. And a lot of that drove kind of this sense of, the way I see it is those early childhood experiences that are overwhelming. It's like that part of us freezes in time, that younger, vulnerable part. And then these characters come in to try and keep it safe. So some people become people pleasers to protect their inner child. Some people become overachievers. And for me, I think it was that overachiever was the way that I kind of hid what I was really feeling, hid the part of me that felt like he wasn't enough. Like, I'll become a tough martial arts guy. I was a cage fighter when I was 18, 19. And that was my way of saying, you're not going to get near the vulnerable part of me. So driven by, I think we internalize the external voices. So the inner critic that most of us have has come from somewhere. Maybe it's a father figure, maybe it's a teacher, maybe it's a bully from growing up. We take that voice that's out there and we put it in our own mind. And that was the case for me.
It sounded like it would have been really easy to collect evidence of why you wasn't good enough, with all of the bullying and stuff. It's just that relentless, consistent confirmation of what your deepest, darkest thoughts are already, What would you say to that? Do you think that's somewhere near it?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, I think for us all, right? A lot of people, you meet them on the street and you'll ask, what do you want? And they'll say, I want to be successful or I want to be happy. But when you ask what is success or what is happiness, they don't really have a gauge. And so how can you hit a target that you don't have a sense of? So probably similar, like, it's an interesting one to say, I'm, the common belief, I'm not enough. And to ask someone, how would you know you were enough? It can kind of stop us in our tracks. It's like, I was actually on a retreat recently and they had us play with our negative belief and try to keep it really light and almost laugh at your belief. So like, my belief was I'm not enough. And I was like, I had this weird thing where I was like, maybe I'm not enough. And that I was just kind of laughing. I was saying, it's not really a big deal to not be enough.
Yeah. Not enough for what? And that's another question, isn't it? I mean, just to say, I think I know why I resonate with you so much, because I was in the fitness industry for 15 years.
Uh,
I turned to professional wrestling and amateur wrestling and shoot wrestling because um, I was angry. I went through some pretty physical abuse as a kid, some domestic violence, some torture, and that shaped my belief system as a kid. I grew up with that very strong feeling of I'm not enough, and it still rises its head. One
mm,
of the victories I've had, if you want to call it that, is that I now realize that my job is not to dispel that belief, is to work with it, because it's not
mm,
going anywhere. It's not going anywhere. As soon as I move up to, if you want to call it the next level, I'm not a great fan of that type of language, but when I find myself in a situation where I'm out my comfort zone, back it comes again, back it comes again. And early on, I used to think, oh, I failed. I'm still that guy. I'm still that guy. And I'm like, what if I'm always that guy? But what
mm,
if I'm always that guy? And when I was a kid, I was convinced by my surroundings that I was a weak and fearful person. I was scared all the time. But then I realized that actually, in order to be brave, you have to first be scared. So
yeah.
I continuously find myself in situations that scare me, which give me the opportunity to be brave. And then we go around in this cycle. And I think for me, I've accepted that. I've accepted that that's probably the way I'm going to move forward, and I'm going to stop trying to predict the future. I still do though.
Mm.
I still do. It's a habit.
I think you're pointing to something really really useful and interesting that certainly for me over the last couple of years has been, and I think it's coming out more in the therapy world with internal family systems and these things. There's this idea that we might think of ourselves as this person here, but in reality we're many different parts. So you have a fearful part, you have a courageous part, you have a motivated part, you have a lazy part, and almost compartmentalizing ourselves, we can understand ourselves more because, again, the part of me that doesn't feel enough, how old is that part? I'm 35 now, but that part of me that doesn't feel enough doesn't feel 35. They feel
No.
5 or 6 or 7. So it's a nice way of kind of communicating with ourselves. And
Yeah.
just to share, I didn't realize the professional wrestling link. My escapism as a child was professional wrestling. I just loved it. I was obsessed, and I carried that into my teens. And I remember contacting a wrestling school in the UK when I was 15, and I said, I want to be a wrestler, but I got to finish school first. What can I do between now and then to, be ready for wrestling school? And they said, start doing judo and lift weights, so get strong and learn how to fall. And I went back to school the next day, and on the notice board, the law of attraction, I see judo classes are starting. And so I
No.
started judo, and it completely changed my life. It took me to America to be a cage fighter at 18. That introduced me to my first fitness mentor. My fitness mentor got me. So it's amazing how these kind of threads, I guess, can carry us in life.
That's unreal. And actually, that's hit me actually, because that's when I was young, there was, like I say, a lot of violence, and my escapism was wrestling.
Mm,
I fell in love with the characters, the music, the commentating, all of it, just the storylines, the lot. And when I was say 16 years old, maybe no, it was a bit sooner than that, but I went down to Kent and wrestled with the MWA UK. And
that's who I contacted.
yeah, I thought you'd say that under a guy named Andre, but then a little while later, Fergal Devitt, I don't know if you come into him. Yeah, he started a wrestling school over in Ireland. I wondered, did you ever go there?
You know what? I was due to go. It took me months and months and months to convince my father to take me. And then my
Yeah.
grandmother passed away the weekend I was due to go. So it never happened. But things worked out as they were supposed to. But
Yeah.
I have
Well,
a question for you actually. Who were the wrestlers? And there's a reason I asked this. Who were the wrestlers that you most connected with when you were younger?
when I was younger, Shawn Michaels, Bret Hart, um, who else was there? Mr. Perfect.
And
It's got to be some psychology in that, isn't
I was gonna say,
it?
what is the common thread in the characters you liked? What did you see in them that you wanted?
Confidence.
Confidence, yeah.
Yeah, confidence, self-assurity, success, that attitude of just going after it, like nothing's going to stop you. Because ironically, none of those were classically big men in a big
Mm,
man sport. They were all somebody, and I mean, they're big men to me. They were massive guys, but in a sport where everyone was 6'5" plus, they wasn't.
Sure.
but they never let it stop them, you know. And that's been my attitude my whole life. Like I absolutely refuse to believe that if somebody else can do something that I can't do it too. You
Mm.
know, I just don't. It doesn't mean I will, but I refuse to believe it. I will try it. I will try it, and I will try. And the only way I think of failure is if you quit. You know, because I genuinely believe. I'm not just saying as a cliche. I believe that you can't fail unless you quit, because things are there. I've had so many situations in my life where if I had labeled it failure at the time, I would have quit. But then years later, I come back and I have that little laughing moment with myself, like, oh, that's why that happened. I needed that. That was the only way I was going to learn that lesson so that I could move forward. You know, it's like
Mm.
that. You know, you say to your kid or whatever, don't touch the flame. It's hot. They don't know what that means. They touch the flame, they know what it means then.
Yeah.
And they
Yeah.
tend to not touch it again, you know. But
Yeah.
going back to what you said about like multiple personalities in your mind, or multiple aspects of yourself is probably a better way to frame it. I often look at it like a committee. Like there's lots of different parts of yourself, like your self-belief, your self-confidence, your self-esteem, all of these different areas of yourself, including your self-respect. And I think what a lot of people can be guilty of, and this is only an analogy, is self-respect gets disrespected.
Mm.
And if you think about all of those parts of ourselves, and many, many more as a committee or a meeting room, and they're all there, and there's one person just getting told to shut up, don't talk, we're not listening to you. How would that play out in real life? It'd be chaos. It would be really, really bad. But yet we seem to do it to ourselves. We tell ourselves, we disrespect our self-respect, who and we get angry because that self-respect most likely is trying to highlight boundaries. It's trying to say, hey, listen, this person's crossing this boundary. It doesn't have to be a big one. It could just be a small one, but those small ones turn to big ones, tend to anyway.
Mm.
um how do you feel about that idea, or am I mad?
No, it's super interesting. Yeah. It's really interesting. I've kind of noticed this in my own life. This fear of my own power, or
Mm,
fear of. It's a very Irish thing. I'm sure it's global, but I definitely feel it in Ireland. This kind of sense of like, don't get above your station, don't be too much, don't be, just kind of get on with it, keep your head down, and so, oftentimes, as you like the self-respect thing. It's funny. I was talking to a friend recently, and he was telling me that he's working with a therapist, and he set a boundary for the first time. And he went to his therapist and he said, "Oh, I really I went full on with the boundary, and I was, I kind of flipped from the nice guy to the opposite." And the therapist said, "Oh, tell me what that looked like." And the therapist said that doesn't sound like you flipped to the opposite at all. That sounds like you set a healthy kind of, you just spoke up for yourself. And I think when we're used to kind of playing small, not, and keeping ourselves small and kind of appeasing people and people pleasing and not listening to that sign of self-respect, the idea of we can confuse, maybe we can think we're being cocky almost
mm,
when we're just owning it a bit more. So I definitely think there's something there. But ultimately it all comes down to the fear of disconnection. I've thought about this a lot, like there's boundaries that I want to set, but my fear around saying what's true for me is that, what if the other person leaves? What if they reject me? What if they abandon me? What's that going to mean about me? That's typically, and it's something I ask people sometimes to like fill in the blank. How am I afraid I will be judged if I set this boundary? Or how am I afraid I'll be judged if I demonstrate more self-respect or confidence in my life? And again, usually there's some material to work with in that.
yeah, that's what I mean. It's never ending, is it? You
Yeah.
know, and I think that's it though. You hit the nail on the head there. It's we mistake that difference in our behavior for being wrong. We label it. We apply meaning to it when we're just doing it for the first time. It's like you and me going to do something new. You've done it loads of times, and I'm doing it for the first time. And I do it once, and I say, "Oh, I'm rubbish at it." Well, of
Yeah.
course I am. I've just done it. I've never done it before. And it's like when we try these new behaviors, we're most likely not going to be very good at them, but we
Mm.
jump straight to that labeling of, hey, that must mean that I'm never going to be good at it. And that's not what that means, I don't think. You know, you might never be good at it, but at that point you can't rightly say, can you? I don't think.
There's a mantra that I live by, and it's probably similar to what you've talked about there in terms of this belief that I can do anything.
Mm,
Not, I always say I can do anything, but not everything. Like that's one thing. So the importance of
mm,
focus. But the other one is I become what I practice. So if I practice being anxious and I don't kind of try to step out of that, I'm going to become anxious. If I practice calm, Like a lot of us want to be calm, but what is our practice for calm? So, you know, I want to practice being social. I want to be, you know, I was terrified of public speaking. That was my biggest fear in life. And now it's my profession. So that obviously was a practice. So yeah, I think I was talking to someone about this yesterday. Actually, we were talking about jiu-jitsu, which is a big passion of mine. And we were saying how inspiring it is to see guys in their 50s and 60s coming in and training for the first time, and just having the humility to say, I'm going to try this thing that's completely outside my comfort zone. And for me, at least, the most inspiring people in life are the people that are willing to be a beginner again, to fail, you know, and reinvent themselves and all that. But when it comes to ourselves, I think it's terrifying, you know, sometimes change. Like I'm comfortable with jiu-jitsu, I'm comfortable with public speaking. Something like dance, you know, is edgy for me. And there's lots of things that are edgy for me. But again, if I was willing to lean into it, I'm sure I could get over my 2 left feet.
I went to the Latitude Festival recently, and I was talking there, and I walked through the Zen area, and there was all of these people, and they were just dancing, but they were dancing wild. It was just like they had their eyes closed, and they were touching themselves and all this stuff. And I walked past, and I had this judgment of like, what, they're ridiculous. What are they doing? And then I stopped myself, and I thought, interesting. Why are you thinking that? And then I come to the conclusion that I was envious, because I wish that I could just let go like that and just be like that. But I have not practiced that, you know. And I sort of said it in in the speech that I delivered. And then one lady stood up and said, I want to see you dancing later. I tell you what, I couldn't get out of there quick enough. I was like, right, I'm going home then, bye.
yeah. It's funny. There's this idea of you know, our shadow, and we see in other people what we haven't accepted in ourselves. And they'll say, am I informed or am I disturbed by something? So if you're to walk past and say, oh, there's a bunch of people dancing, you're informed by that. But to have that kind of reaction, as you noted yourself, you're like, oh, maybe there's something in this for me.
Because I'm not usually like that. Like I'm quite open-minded and accepting of many things, even things that, you know, like I once had a really, really interesting conversation with a racist. We were in a public setting where aggression wasn't an option for him, and I don't want to use the word challenge, but I was curious about his beliefs, what led him to believe that all people from a certain race were a certain way. And, you know, he came up with some compelling answers, and we had a little debate around it. And actually, when we left, I dare say we had some sort of respect between us both, which is interesting, because I could have very easily jumped to a different conclusion, much like he could have. So, yeah, it is interesting curiosity. I mean, I was going to, you know, part of your power in the world, I think, is your honesty and your story. So I'm curious about, what's one of the most challenging things that you've ever experienced, would you say?
Ooh. I think, you know, when I went to Dublin that time at 22 to try and launch this business, and I say launch a business, I mean, I wanted to teach fitness classes in a park. That was the business. But I was struggling with finding my feet in Dublin, and borrowing money from anyone I could, because I didn't want to come home, and using a lot of drink at the time, like to numb myself and distract myself from. And I reached a point where I was suicidal, and I went to the docks in the middle of the night and kind of stared in the water and thought, you know, I don't know if I want to keep going. I had so much energy in my body. I walked around the city for hours and then sat at the docks. And, you know, that was definitely one of the more challenging time periods in my life. Yeah, that's the one that jumps out probably as the most like intense, you know, just the real sense of like completely lost in life, you know, and I completely isolated. And, you know, I think suicide is linked with shame, like, and shame is linked with kind of hiding, like there's something wrong with me, like I'm different to everyone else. Other people don't experience this real isolation. And that was really what I felt. I was like, I'm the only person in the world. You know, with a bit of perspective, of course, I can look and I say, again, you're in your 20s, you're figuring it out. You can be in your 30s, 40s, 50s figuring it out. But when you're in it, it can feel very isolating. And I think partnered with that was like early days of social media, and I was putting out this image that things were going well. So I think that's important too, is like when there's a disconnect between how you really are feeling and how you're really living versus what you're portraying, the
Yeah.
bigger the bigger the disconnect, the further you feel from yourself, or at least the further I feel from myself. So
Yeah, there's like a shame of hypocrisy, isn't there? Like, I've been guilty of that in the past. When I used to put it out there, I was Mr. Fitness, and I had a very quiet background alcohol problem. Like that was massively out of control. Many times I would be in the gym and training people, and it strangely enough never impacted my job, but I'd feel terrible, and I was there giving all this energy, and I'd walk away feeling very fraudulent. No one ever complained, thankfully, but it's just I am authentic. I am very moralistic. So to me, I always felt like I was just lying. I was
yeah,
living a lie. But I mean, what made that so difficult then? Was it what if you could name it, what would have been the thing that made that experience so hard?
isolation. I think that sense of I'm the only one in the world, because I had gone. I asked you earlier about the wrestlers you liked and stuff, and I think for me, when I think back, there was Jeff Hardy is the one that kind of stood out to me, and I was reflecting on.
Yeah.
I was on a Jungian podcast once, and they asked me about who I admired growing up and who I didn't like, and they kind of it showed me how that played out in my life since. So, and Jeff Hardy was a wrestler who was he was kind of cool, but he was different, and he was on the
Yeah.
edge, and he did things his own way, and I think I've always kind of carried that with me, that I want to do things my way. And um when I left school, there was this, I'm going to do this fitness thing. And everyone around me said, you can't make money in Ireland from fitness. You can't put food on the table. And no, I'm going to make it happen. I'm going to make it happen. And the closest people in my life were telling me no. My best friends were telling me no. My parents were telling me no. There's nobody supporting me. I was completely on my own with this thing. But there was this dream, I'm going to make it happen. I'm going to make it. And then when it wasn't happening, and I was broke, and I was using alcohol to numb myself, and I was having to face the reality of going back with my tail between my legs and saying, "Dad, can I move back into the house?" It didn't work. It was that kind of ultimate defeat, I think, and the isolation of, you were all right and I was wrong. Who was I to think I could chase my dream? You were, that, I think that was it.
Isn't that interesting though? Because they wasn't ultimately right, were they? That is a good example of labeling something too early or applying meaning to something too early. Because a little bit later on, you made it a huge success.
Yeah, yeah.
And I wonder, would you have made it a huge success if that event hadn't happened?
Well, people ask me since, like, what was the difference when you came back home? Like, what changed? And one of the things was, my dad was always like, his ultimate concern was that I'm secure in life, and which I really appreciate. And he said, "Oh, why don't you study physiotherapy? You could, like, still work in an area that's similar to fitness, but you might have more job prospects." And so I thought, "Oh, okay, maybe a good idea." So I applied to go back to college to study physiotherapy, and I got accepted. And it was like the light at the end of the tunnel. Okay, and then they contacted me. They said, "We don't have enough people for the course. We're going to defer for a year, so you've lost your place." And my heart sank. And I said, "Okay, I'm going to study anatomy for the year just so I can catch up, because I'm not very good at that stuff. And I'll start teaching a few fitness classes to get the money to go to college." And so I started teaching these classes just as a means of making some money for college, not thinking I was going to, use that as a profession. And then 3 months later, I've got 100 people a day coming to train. And it was like, but the biggest thing that changed was when I was in Dublin, I wanted to jump from A to Z. Like, I'm starting, and I want to be the celebrity trainer up here who's got all the clients. When I came back to Galway, I started from nothing, and I had 5 people on my first morning, and that I was over the moon. And I said, "Okay, now I want to get 6, now I want to get 7, and now I want to get 8." And if you, like we've talked about, if you keep doing it, if you keep working for long enough at something, it will get bigger and bigger and bigger. So rather than A to Z, it became about, how do I go from A to B, and how do I go from B to C, and how do I go from C to D, and do that consistently enough for 10 years, and any area of your life is going to be very different.
Yeah, there's a story I heard once about somebody saying, they go into a dark, dark forest and they can't see anywhere. And they say, "Well, can you see the part in front of you?" He said, "Yeah." He said, "Well, just step there." And it's just about taking that next step whenever you can. Just keep taking that next step. It's the same with your headlights on your car when you're driving down a dark lane. And, you don't know if there's a tree falling up ahead, but you just have faith, don't you? You just keep looking in front of you and reacting to what's in front of you instead of trying to perceive what's ahead of you all the
Mm.
time. That's a wonderful story. That really is. That's a wonderful story. And Yeah, that's why I admire you, man. You just and we are very similar. I'm sort of like thinking on my feet here because I'm taken aback by like I had to go home as well, um, feeling like I failed. But you know, one of the things I hear in that is something that I've been through myself too. Is it sounded like you were trying to be a PT in a certain way that just didn't align with you at all. And you were
Mm.
kept trying, you'd seen a model of it and you were trying to emulate it. You were like, this is how it looks, this is how it looks. And then when you went back, you just did it your way because you'd taken that pressure off. You know what I mean? You'd taken that pressure off yourself and you was like, well, I'm not trying to do that anymore. That didn't work. That's not gonna work. And then look what happened. You know, there's gotta be a nice eloquent way of putting that into a quote for Instagram.
Well, you know what was funny was, so I start these classes on the beach. They start going well. Word starts traveling outside of Galway, and I got a role on the TV to do like 10 weeks on national TV, the fitness expert each week. And because this thing got big quick, and I was still the insecure guy that now had, I thought getting successful was going to make me feel more secure, but really it just put a magnifying glass on my insecurities. It made me feel like, oh, now there's just more people that are going to see that I'm a whatever I am. But I would go every week to the telly and we'd record the fitness segment and people would send in questions and the presenters would say, okay, Pat, there's a question here about how to get a six pack. And every week I would self-abandon and I would lose that authenticity and I'd think I need to be the fitness guy and I'd be looking up what do fitness people wear, when they're on the telly, and I was dressing up the way I thought fitness. So I definitely lost that at times. And in my head I thought, well, there's no easy way to get a six pack, but I can't say that because they want the soundbite answer. And every week I'd drive home from the telly and I'd say, oh fuck, I let myself down again. So
Wow, that's really powerful. Yeah, that's so powerful because I think a lot of people do that. I think people do that with their businesses. And I was talking to somebody the other week about Instagram and Instagram growth, and they were saying the problem is people can't really be themselves on Instagram anymore because it's not supported by the algorithm. So people have to play to the algorithm in order to get to a certain place to be able to be themselves.
Yeah, yeah,
it's mad. And
yeah.
I was like, yeah, I'm not doing that. I'd rather just not have no followers than play that game. I've done that before, and I end up in a bad place when I do that. I don't drink anymore because, and I tell people I'm just not very good at it. I did it really badly. I drink into the early hours of the night at the sacrifice of everything. So I'm not going to do that. I'm not going to put myself in a place where I have to sacrifice my integrity, my morals anymore. And that means that sometimes there'll be opportunities I miss out on. And I think I'm grateful for what I have is the truth,
Mm.
Just to tie that up, that terrible experience, what do you think you ultimately learned from that?
Probably what you mentioned about the kind of there's that fable that's shared sometimes about oh God, I often try and share it and I mess it up. The farmer that has a bunch of horses. Have you heard this story? I think Chinese farmer with the horses.
Is it the Taoist farmer?
What's it? What is it?
Is it the Taoist farmer? Is that the one?
Yes, yes,
Yes,
yes,
yeah,
yes, yes, yes.
yeah, yeah.
So
Go.
ultimately, for anyone who hasn't heard, it's this man has a farm and he's got a bunch of horses. And one day the gate gets left open and one of the wild horses disappear. No, does he have two horses? And he wakes up one day and one of the horses is gone. Or two of the horses are gone. I'm making up the story as we go.
I love it. Personally,
And his neighbor comes around and he says, "Oh, it's terrible. How sad, how bad." And the farmer says, "No, we don't know if it's good or bad." And the next day, the two horses come back, and now they've got a bunch of wild horses that have come with them. So now he's got like 12 horses. And the neighbor comes around. He says, "Oh, how amazing!" And the farmer says, "We don't know if it's good or bad." And then the next day, the son is out feeding the horses, and he gets kicked by one of the horses and breaks his leg. And neighbor comes around, "Oh, how sad, how bad?" And he goes, "We don't know if it's good or bad." And next day, the military come and they say, "Right, we're taking all the healthy men to come to war." And the son has the broken leg, so he can't go to war. And the neighbor comes around and he says, "Oh, how good, how." And the moral of the story, of course, is in isolation. I always think about, like, if you zoom in on a picture, like zoom in really close on a picture, you're going to see this little speck of color. and it doesn't have much context, but then you zoom out and there's beauty in it. So I think that's what I learned from that experience was no matter how good things get or no matter how bad things get, it's just an experience and it's a part of a bigger picture. And if you can hold that and, see rejection as redirection and see,
Nice.
these kind of things, yeah, life is a collection of days and not to get hung up on how things are today. Everything can change overnight.
Yeah, and like some of those experiences, you had an experience that was so powerful that you were sat at the docks
Mm.
with dark thoughts and intentions.
Mm.
But yet, without that experience, would you be the man you are today? Interesting.
Before that, those couple of months of my life, I was the regular personal trainer talking about sit-ups and broccoli. And after that experience, I was a very different personal trainer talking about community and writing down what you're proud of. So yeah, it definitely changed. We can only teach what we've embodied, I suppose, and I think that we have to go to these dark places sometimes to understand what it is to be in a dark place. And yeah.
I think one of the similarities we probably share, correct me if I'm wrong, is that when I was a PT, I had a lot of success with clients. But one day when I was 40 years old, I was sat on a hammock that I got for my 40th birthday in my garden. And I was reading, been having this feeling. I always reflect on my birthday. And I've been having this feeling that I'd been denying myself that I didn't want to be in the fitness industry anymore, but I'd put so many years into it, right? So I couldn't just walk away from it. And I had a successful business. I was making money. I was doing well. Why would I walk away from it? I could hear all them voices in my head.
Mm.
And I looked for all of my reviews, testimonials, and something struck me is that I'd helped all these people lose weight, get in shape, change themselves in it, but not one of them mentioned weight loss, diet, exercise. They all mentioned Johnny helped me change his life. And I was like, I don't know if I'm a PT. And it sounds like you was the same. It sounds like that I believe sometimes that people come, I remember many people, generally women, and I would ask them, what makes you want to make this change? And they would say, I hate the way I look. And I'd go, that's interesting because I don't know whether I hate myself is going to be a great motivator when it gets hard. Because it's not, is it? When the girls call and they say, hey, it's time for cocktails, it's time for cake, and you've got to resist it or make a plan to have a bit of fun but not too much fun. I hate myself. It's not going to stand up as the massive motivator ever. So to me, I was just like, I don't like doing this anymore. I don't necessarily agree that this person that's coming to me thinking that all their problems will be solved when they lose weight or they look a certain way, when it's not. This is a symptom of something else. This is a symptom of how they feel,
Mm.
and then
Mm.
what's making them feel like that is, well, that's a psychologist or a counselor at that point. but now I can help with that. And I feel like sometimes I look back and I think, oh, did I waste all that time? Did I waste all that time? Should I have just done psychology from the beginning? But you never know the answers to that. You drove yourself mad, right?
Yeah.
But did when you stepped away from fitness, was that part of the reason why, do you think?
Um, it was twofold. Yeah, it was a couple of things. One was I felt out of integrity myself. I was a little bit, I was telling all my clients to chase their goals and chase their dreams, and it had just become a bit boring to me. And I'd become a bit numb to it. Like we had 800 clients a month at times online, and people were coming, wow, I've lost this much weight. And it just meant nothing to me anymore to hear, because it was the same. I just knew like the system's going to work if you work the system kind of thing. So I was a bit disconnected from it. I was burnt out. I think I was, running around the country doing talks and running the gym and running the online business and having staff, which was something I never wanted to have. So, and then the other side, I think because I grew up and it was my passion and it was my lifeline for so long, fitness, when it became my work and I was living in the gym all the time, it kind of helped, it kind of pulled me away from, it was like, oh God, I don't know if I love this anymore. I want a separate space, which ironically was what brought me back to martial arts 10 years after stopping, because I needed somewhere that I could go and kind of tick that box. But, there's, it's maybe a little bit out there for some people, but there's this idea of, people think about life purpose, like what is my life purpose? And sometimes people think it's going to fall on their lap, or people think that maybe, oh, he knows his purpose, he's lucky, or she knows their purpose. And I always believe that purpose is about leaning into whatever's calling you at that time. But
Nice.
the harder piece of it is that at some point that's going to run its course, and then you need to step away. So for me, the fitness thing, I had just done the Late Late Show in Ireland, which is the biggest TV show in Ireland. So the fitness thing was at its absolute peak, and I just knew I don't want to do this anymore. So gave the gym to my friend. I said, it's yours now, and I walked into the unknown, and that was me stepping closer to the purpose piece. And 3 years later, people say, "Oh wow, it's so cool you're doing this speaking stuff. It's amazing to see." I had spent those 3 years feeling lost, feeling like not lost, but feeling like, oh God, maybe I should have stayed in fitness, because it's easier to tell someone I'll help you get a six pack than it is to say I'm going to coach you or I'm going to help you with. So, but I, for me, that's what life is about. It's like once you've done your piece, same as a relationship. I think like if you're in a relationship and you don't just stay because I've invested 3 years in it, so I need to stay in it. If it's not working, same with work, and that requires massive courage. That requires massive discomfort and support systems and everything else. But at least that's how I'm choosing to live. Not that it's right or it's wrong, but that's my choice too.
Yeah, and I think there's something. Coaching is a beautiful industry because, and I felt free when I became a coach. When I was in the fitness business, I remember I'd hear people at barbecues over the summer and they'd be like, "Oh, now I've hired this trainer, I'm going to have a six pack next year." And it's like straight away, they're taking away the accountability. This trainer's going to make this happen. And I've always been of the belief that, you can't change anybody else. You cannot do it. You can't do it. They're the only one that can do it. You can support, you can encourage, you can
Mm.
guide at times, you can offer
Mm.
education, you can offer tips, you can offer perspective, never advice. But you can't change them. And I think for me, the freedom in coaching is knowing that I know nothing and that I've not got the answers for somebody else. I don't have them. I'm a really good listener and I've had a lot of experiences and a lot of education. And I believe that when education meets experience, it creates wisdom. So I've got some perspective to offer and it can be helpful. And I've guided and supported people, but I've never got the answer. Never got the
Mm.
answer. And with fitness, it was like, right, how do you get a six pack? And you, like you just said, you nailed it. You're like, that's a really. I used to get that asked at kids' parties. I'd be at my kids' parties with my kids, and some lady come over and go, "Oh, you're the fitness guy, right?" It's like Johnny, and then they'd be like, "How'd you get a six pack?" And I'm like, "Well, six packs got a lot to do with diet." Oh no, my diet's fine. I'm like, right, and I just knew then. I was like, I don't want to hear it. Oh, I do crunches.
the
It's good.
the You're the Fitness guy is funny. A couple of years ago, I was going deep in trauma work. So I was doing physical trauma release work. I was doing Gabor Mate's compassionate inquiry work. I was doing all these different trauma courses, and I went to Portugal for 2 months, and I was working from there, and I found a kind of a Facebook group for all the people that were into yoga and stuff like that. And I said, look, I'm going to be here for 2 months. Uh, I'm doing case studies around trauma work. So I'm doing a bunch of free trauma work. If anyone wants, to do a session, I'll be here for 2 months and I'd love to work with you. The next day I walk into a local coffee shop and this woman does a beeline across the coffee shop. She goes, "You're the trauma guy." I was just like, oh, geez.
So wow, look
Yeah.
around like
Yeah, welcome to Portugal.
you're the trauma guy. Wow, you're like, okay. I'm gonna shift gears a little bit. Life can be messy and complicated and unpredictable and overwhelming and all that good stuff that we've already spoken about. But there's so much messaging out there that claims to be trying to help people with their mental health.
Mm.
However, mental health challenges are at their highest recorded, with 21% of adults experiencing at least one mental illness. What intervention, support, or messaging would you like to see out there, like globally, nationally, whatever, locally, to encourage change in this area?
Oh, it's difficult because it's a big systemic challenge. Two pieces that I think are really important. One is community. So having community where people can share, they can be heard, they can be acknowledged. A lot of mental health issues, I think, are due to underexpression. So not being able to express myself, express my joy, express my sadness, express my authenticity. If I have to hide all those parts of me, it's going to have an effect on my mental health. So that's one piece, is creating spaces where people can lean in more to a little bit of who they are without shame or without judgment. I think therapists and coaching and everything else is great. Of course, it's like what I do for work. I think the limitation with that is you're working one to one with someone, whereas I think being in a group is even more powerful because you've got 20 people mirroring back that, oh, it's safe to be who you are. You can be yourself. So that's one side, and I think the other side that needs to, and it's coming more and more into the mainstream, is the idea of the mind-body connection. So the role of the nervous system in mental health. So effectively, put really simply, we've got 3 states. We can feel safe and connected, as we hopefully do now, myself and yourself here. We're socially engaged. We feel comfortable, relaxed. If stress comes into our environment, we'll probably shift into fight or flight. So our focus will change. We'll be less social. We'll be more looking around us for the threats and in a different energy. And if we spend too long in that fight or flight energy, we'll eventually burn out and we'll find ourselves in a freeze energy. So a lot of people are stuck in that fight or flight energy, that constant state of stress. And so that stops things like our capacity to be present, our capacity to be social, our capacity to feel safe, our capacity to access our rational mind. So effectively what I'm saying is mental health we can think about as, okay, mental health must be about the mind. In reality, I think mental health is more affected by what's happening in the nervous system. If my body perceives that I'm in a state of threat or stress, I can't access positive thinking, because why would I be positive when I'm in a state of stress? So I think we need to start coming into the body and creating safety in the body. Deep breaths, feeling my feet on the ground, feeling safe within my environment, taking out the hyperstimulation, and just creating that sense of ease. It's like when you do maybe a yoga nidra class or meditation, your world looks different after the few minutes because you can access your rational mind again. So those 2 pieces, I think, the mind-body connection and the community aspects.
And that right there is why the universe pushed us towards exercise first.
Yeah, really. Yeah. But
Yeah.
I put people in this way. We talk about mental health, we talk about depression, anxieties, these different states. Those are physical states. They're happening in the body. And so, if I'm in work and my boss shouts at me, I'm going to have a physical response to that. I'll have anger come up in my system, or fear. And that'll be a collection of sensations in my body running around the place. There'll be a hormonal dump happening within my body. And that wants to be expressed. If I have pure expression, I'd hit my boss, or I'd run away, or I'd shout, or I'd scream. But of course, it's not appropriate. And so I sit there, and all that sits in my system. And so, as you say, exercise allows me to move some of that energy. Shouting into a pillow allows me to move some of that energy. Doing deep breath work allows me to move into that energy. So having a body-based approach to dealing with, there's two sides, right? The mental side is challenging my thoughts and doing the cognitive work and the coaching and stuff. And then the body-based stuff is, clearing out my system, if you will, of all those old blockages and kind of tensions.
Have you ever heard the stinging nettle analogy?
What's the analogy?
Stinging nettle.
I don't.
No, I had this analogy once. I don't know if it's true. I've never tried it, but they say that when you're stung by a stinging nettle, the antidote to the sting is within the leaf, but no one's brave enough to scrunch up the thing that stung them. And what I love about the 2 things that you've just said in answer to that question, community and mind and body, is that they all point inwards. They all point to the fact that, and the analogy for me is that the answers to the solutions to the challenges or issues you're facing are always found within, but we're convinced to look without or outside of us. And what you're saying there is you go to community, and the reason you go to community is because it's reflected back to you. It's okay to be you. Yeah. It's okay to speak your mind. It's okay to feel this way. Matter of fact, I felt that way, which is resonant and empathy. And then you're saying mind and body, they're yours. They're your mind, they're your body. They work together. They're sending messages. I often say emotions are messages. Yeah. And we don't listen. We don't listen to them. We just ignore them. We tell ourselves, oh, that can't be right because so-and-so said it isn't. Or, like anger's a message. It's telling you a boundary's been crossed. It's giving you the energy to put it back in place. But you're going, nope, I'm just going to swallow that. And then I wonder why I'm about to commit murder in the supermarket because someone nicked my space. It's like, yeah, that's why.
Yeah, well, of course, the West, we prioritize the mind so much, and we're taught from a young age to be in the mind. So before we even realize it, anger is happening in my body, and I'm in my head trying to micromanage that, or trying to defend against that, or whatever it might be. So going back to what we talked about earlier, that overachiever character or the people pleaser character, these characters, these are all efforts to run away from the sensations in the body because I don't want to be with the sadness. I don't want to be with the anger. I don't want to listen to those parts because that feels edgy or vulnerable. And so I'll just act out these unconscious patterns. So I think a lot of these things we've heard about for years, meditation, yoga, all these things that we know are good for us. I think it's useful for me at least to have an understanding as to why. So like, um, that makes a difference for me. The context.
Yeah, I always say it. I think my son's got it from me as well. Is I always have to overstand stuff instead of understand it.
I like that. I like
I
that.
was that annoying kid that would ask why until the teacher just told me to shut up.
I like that. Overstand. I like.
Yeah, I like to overstand stuff, because I ask questions and people go, "Why do you need to know that?" I say, "I don't know. I just do." I need to have a full picture and understand it. I suppose it probably makes me feel quite safe and secure, feeling like I know stuff or I know all about it. I know everything. I know where all the traps are. Because as a kid, I was encouraged to be hyper vigilant. So that never goes away. And actually, I've learned to make that a superpower. Now when I sit with clients, I see it all. It's not just the words they're saying, it's the words they're not saying, the tone of their voice, the pauses, the way they're shifting, and if I'm with them in person, it might be the way they smell or their skin are glistening if it means they're sweating or whatever, all of that. It's all information to me. And I'm sure you have the same the same approach. But do you feel there's a difference between mental and emotional health?
Yeah, I think there's different ways you could look at it, but sometimes we'll talk about a top-down approach or a bottom-up approach. So top-down is my mind affects how I feel. So my thoughts affect my feelings. So kind of cognitive behavioral based. So when I feel or when I have a thought that I'm not enough, the feeling in my body is shame. So that's top down. My mind is affecting my body. And that's mostly what psychology has moved toward over the last couple of decades. I think the root of the word psychology is the study of the soul, but it kind of followed the medical model and went more into diagnoses and putting things in neat boxes and stuff over the last couple of decades. So it's all about the mind, and it kind of parks the body, parks environment, parks social. It decompartmentalizes a lot of things. So that's the mental side. My mind affects my body. The emotional side for me is my body affects my mind. So kind of what we talked about there, that if there's tension in my body, my world looks different to when there's relaxation in my body. If there's anxiety and fear around my heart space, my partner looks different to how they do when I feel safe and relaxed. So I can't outthink that. I've got to come into the body and ease the tension. Just progressive muscle relaxations, body scans, yoga nidra, all these different tools. So that would be the difference for me. Is the mental side is more, I guess, therapeutic in a way. It's like I can go back to my past and I can figure out where my stories come from, how it's influenced how I see the world. I can do all this cognitive work that helps me to see. But for me in my own life, that had a limitation where, at 28 on paper, from a mental standpoint, everything in my life looked good. Like I'm where I'm supposed to be, and I have everything I thought I ever wanted. Like cognitively, it all made sense, but in my body, I was completely overwhelmed. So I kept neglecting my body and the anxiety that I was feeling from moving too fast in life. And I kept, as you say, ignoring the messengers in the emotions and going to my head. So I think that's the blend, is can I work with the mind and my difficult thoughts, but can I also come into the body? And I think, if people are doing cognitive, one way of thinking about it, I think with a skilled therapist, if you go to a skilled therapist, they'll teach you how to create safety in your body. Because I could sit with a therapist for an hour and work on all my challenges that I'm experiencing at home. But if I don't know how to soothe when I get home, I'm going to go back into that hypervigilant state and I'm going to lose access to all that wisdom that I gained or the knowledge I gained in the session.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. And I think you hit upon such a fundamental point, and that is the way that psychology is defined now as, the soul work. And now we're sort of basing it all on science. And I think that's because human beings have a tendency to want things to make sense.
Yeah.
But the thing about emotions is that there is no sense. There is no logic. Emotions just feel. They don't care about boundaries and reasoning and logic. They don't care. They just feel. And then we try and apply logic to it, which then causes confusion and self-doubt and concern and all these different things, and I think you're absolutely right. I never thought of it like that, we follow a very science-based approach to psychology now. If you do A, B, and C, this is what will happen. And then you say, well, I did A, B, and C and it didn't work. Well, you did it wrong. Or
Mm-hmm.
you're something wrong with you. It's not something wrong with me. It's just that this emotion needs to be processed. Quite a lot of the time, I work with people that are sort of bouncing between primary and secondary emotions, and they're trying to process a secondary emotion. And I'm like, well, hang on a minute. That emotion is an emotion about an emotion,
Mm.
but actually we want to get to the emotion about the event, because that can be processed. The emotion about the emotion is secular. It's just going to keep you going around in circles, and then you're going to keep piling on blame every time you get to a certain point and going, oh, it must be my fault, I'm doing it wrong. And it's like,
Yeah.
no, I'm not doing it wrong, I'm just not processing the right emotion. Like if you're angry, anger can be a primary and secondary emotion, but if it's a secondary emotion, then what are you angry about? Well, I'm angry because I found myself feeling really inadequate in this situation. Now, I'm just going to say blokes because that's what we are, but most blokes don't want to go anywhere near inadequacy. No thanks. No thanks. I'm going to go with angry instead,
Yeah.
because
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
could do that and I'm all right with that. So I think you're right. We're not, we try to make sense of something that's not supposed to be made sense of. You're supposed to feel it. You're supposed to go through the emotion. There's a doctor named Dr. Sebi. He was a natural health doctor, alternative health doctor.
Okay.
And he says that the body is a master machine. It knows exactly what to do. It's only when we intervene that problems start to occur.
Mm.
You
Mm.
know? And it's like,
Yeah.
if you just have the emotion, listen to the message, and kind of do what your body is trying to get you to do, you'll be surprised how quickly you'll get through it. And this is the other part of it, is that people want it to be a pleasant experience. It's not going to be. Change is horrible a lot of the time, and it's like, it's that expectation of, oh, it's supposed to be nice. Well, no, it's not. I learned that on a mountain recently. I went up to Mount Tipcal, got
Oh,
altitude
cool,
sickness.
man. I was on that last November.
Oh, was you? Yeah, dude,
Yeah.
I got altitude sickness. It was
Yeah.
horrendous. I've never had that before. I couldn't tell the difference between a stomach ache and a headache. I'd never felt like that before.
Oh no.
And I got to this moment on the hill where the podcast listeners will be so bored of this story. They're like, oh, here he goes again. I feel like the guy from Only Fools and Horses during the war. But like yeah, he said to me, right, Johnny, come on, up or down. And that moment felt like an hour. Am I going to the top or am I going to the bottom? I was feeling awful. But I said to myself, I didn't come to Morocco to go back down again. I'm going to the top. And then the strange thing happened. Once I'd made that decision, there was no doubt anymore. No one could change my mind. It wasn't. And what else that happened was I accepted that this is going to be hard. No
Mm.
more, oh, this is going to be a beautiful walk and all the expectations I had. I accepted that it was 3 steps and stop. It was horrendous. But I got to the top and I just burst into tears.
Nice.
I was just so emotional, because I think when you do hard things, it forces your body and your mind to work together. That's,
Yeah.
that's why I think it does. I think your
It's,
body and your mind work together finally. It's like my two sons, right? They fight all the time, but when they won at McDonald's, they're best friends. So
the
yeah, I
big
mean, I'm grateful for that point. That's a really good point about, what psychology is. It is about soul work, but there's no science attached to that, I don't think. Um, how are you doing for time? You all right for another question or two?
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Yeah.
So could we spoke about earlier, but I want to talk about getting honest with yourself. Um, I've been helping people get over stuff and move forward and change for about 15 years. And I think it's one of the hardest things you can do. It
Mm.
is one of the hardest things to do for the reasons I just explained. But in my opinion, that process doesn't start in a person, not really, until you stop resisting the things that you don't want to be true and start becoming open to acceptance of the situation. And when I say acceptance, I don't mean you're like, oh, that's just the way it is. I mean, you're accepting it for what it is. You're not trying to change it to accept it. You're just accepting it, because strange thing happens, I feel. It's once you accept something, you own it. And when you own it, you can change it.
Yeah.
So how important do you think, based off of your own experiences and what you've seen, do you think it is to be honest with yourself?
Yeah, it's essential. Anthony de Mello is one of my favorite teachers. He was a Jesuit priest that spoke about spirituality. So when he died, the church didn't really know what to do with him because he spent his life telling people, look within. Um, but he has a quote that says, what you're aware of, you're in control of. And what you're not aware of is in control of you. So what you're aware of, you're in control of. What you're not aware of is in control of you. And so, as you say, I talk a lot about shadow work, which is about taking the parts of ourselves that feel a bit icky and we want to hide from the world. And rather than hiding them, hold them out in front of us like this. So, for example, part of my shadow is I want to impress people with my achievements. And that's just like this kind of murky energy of a way that I can pretend that's not true and hide it, or I can hold it here. And it's much more valuable for me to hold it here and be honest with myself about that's a way I trip myself up. So, we've mentioned drinking as an example. Drinking might be part of my shadow. So, yeah, I think that honesty there's the idea of the power of positive thinking and the power of negative thinking. And, you mentioned climbing mountains there. If we go and climb a mountain and we wake up in the morning and we look up to the summit and we say, oh, the weather's good, we should be good to go, we don't need to bring anything with us. And then we start climbing and suddenly a storm comes in, we're in trouble. And so we wake up and we look, we say, oh, it's looking good, but we better bring supplies just in case. And for me, it's kind of the same thing, that it's great to think positive, think for the best, all this kind of stuff. But I think it's important also to be honest with yourself. So using a fitness example, if I'm going to join the gym this year, it's probably worth me being honest about the fact the last 5 years I've joined the gym, I've quit after a month. Because if I'm honest about it, I can reflect on it, I can learn from it. But if I just rely on motivation and, oh, everything's good this year, it's different. So yeah, the self-honesty is huge. Because I guess also when we hide parts of ourselves from ourselves, it's kind of a form of self-loathing. It's kind of like I don't accept myself because I don't accept these parts of myself. Whereas if I can bring it up and I can say, oh, okay, there's parts of me that are a bit narcissistic, there's parts of me that are a bit judgmental, there's parts of me that are a little bit addictive, there's parts of me, okay, I want to work on these parts. So I'm going to work with them rather than, banish them. This is one of my teachers talk about the basement. We banish these parts to the basement and they're like the angry child down in the basement that's turning into a monster,
Yeah. And I think like what you just said there is so true. Like I was reading a book recently where it was about change, and they were saying that you can weaponize laziness. And I loved it because it's like laziness is the enemy, right? It's the enemy of change. It's the enemy, it's procrastination, it's lack of motivation, it's all that. Or is that laziness just that you've become really good at this, which is sitting and playing the Xbox or whatever, And I think you're, there those sort of things that we demonize, if we look at them in a different light and we ask ourselves, like what's going on there? What am I motivated to do? I think you can weaponize them. I think you can take them and make them a tool.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know if it's the same kind of line of thinking, but procrastination as an example. If I can get curious about procrastination, I always have this thing of like, ask what is it giving you? So whether that's an addictive tendency or it's a pattern. So, I procrastinate all the time. Okay, what does procrastination give you? And maybe it gives you, well, I'm fearful of actually putting something out there, so it keeps me safe in that regard. Maybe I procrastinate because the task is too easy, but if I leave it until the last minute, then it gives me a sense of urgency and then I actually have to work on it, which is common for some of us, I think. Because we all chase addictive flow states, and the way to get in flow is to have a level of challenge. But if the thing is easy, there's no challenge, and so it's boring. So everything's given us something. And that's the key, I think, is looking at ourselves through a compassionate lens. So find the stickiest, most ugly part of you and ask yourself, like, what's the value of this? What's the beauty in this? What's the potential in this? What can I learn from this? Like all those kind of questions can be really useful. Yeah,
it's just challenging those thoughts, and when I say challenging them, not to be wrong or right, but just to learn, to understand. And like you say, compassion, I think, is the ultimate weapon in change. Is compassion. If you can look at a situation without judgment, without labeling, and just go, okay, what's actually happening here? What's actually happening in this situation, and you start to be a bit more factual about it, then I think there's a lot of value in everything we do. Lovely, great answer, man. Yeah, I mean, getting honest with yourself, it's hard, it's not easy. That's the bit I want to say, is that yes, we say get honest with yourself, but then I've met people that will sell themselves a lie, under the guise of it being honesty, but it's not. Like I had a friend who could see me really well, and she'd say, Johnny, you tell people just enough so that they don't ask any more questions. And I'll be like, ooh.
Yeah.
It's like I make out like I'm really open and really honest about who I am and what I am and all of my experiences. But there's parts of my childhood, there's parts of the things that happened to me as a kid, and I'm writing a book at the moment, and it's been very stirring for me because I don't know whether all of it will make it to print or not, but I found myself writing about some of those childhood experiences and reliving those childhood experiences, and a lot of horrible things happened. And I remember being in certain domestic violence talks I've done and things like that, and I'm watching people's eyes to see whether they can handle what I'm about to say, because especially if you've got a room full of mothers, when you're talking about something happening to a 5-year-old, that's not easy to hear. And I don't know if they always need to hear it, you know.
Mm.
So there's honesty, but it's more about being honest with yourself, I think, because if you're honest with yourself, you can build upon that honesty. And I think I heard once that if the pyramid blocks at the bottom had been millimeters out, then it wouldn't have all come to a point at the top. And I think that's the same with the honesty. If you lie to yourself, that's like them blocks being out of place. And then when you get to the top, you're like, well, why has this happened? Well, it's because you were lying to yourself at the bottom. You were telling
Yeah.
yourself this and telling yourself that, and it's not true, you know. But again, it's that power is in that statement I said just then of like, we lie to ourselves about the things, we resist the things that we do not want to be true about ourselves, but they are, and that's hard.
I was only chatting to a friend yesterday and saying like how lucky we are to have people in our lives that call us out a little bit. I actually call us out. There's a different language on that. Call us forward because they see a potential in us. And yeah, I had a funny one recently. What did someone say to me? They said, "You realize you flirt to keep things on the surface because if you remove the flirting, you have to go deeper." And I was like, "Oh," and it's like,
nice to see you. Bye.
yeah. But it's so. I thought about. I shared this with a corporate client a while back. I said, I think about feedback in different levels, and like the first level of feedback is I don't want to hear it. Like I don't want to hear it. The second level of feedback is you say, "Hey Pat, you talk too much," and I say, okay, I'm just gonna. Third level of feedback is actively going out, and that's something I try to do at least once a year. Is like go to 3 or 4 of my close friends and send them a couple of questions. Say, I really appreciate if you could take 10 minutes on this. Where am I a good friend? Where do I fall short? Where do you see me out of integrity? What are my biggest challenges that you see that I keep repeating? Da, da, da. And I send it to people that I know will push me. I don't send it to people who say, "Oh, you're a legend. You're just great," because I don't want that, And yeah, it comes back to what we were saying earlier about mirroring us, being mirrors to each other. Other people see our beauty. Other people also see where we're out of integrity. So it's just being open to that, I think.
Mate, you're so right. This has been a great conversation, but I'm sure you're a busy man and you've got lots to do. So I'm going to end with just one question. And that is that same question I ask everybody. And that is there anything that you'd like to pass on that could help people with their self-development?
Well, maybe 2 tools. One is it's a practice called morning pages, which some of your listeners might be familiar with. And morning pages came from a book called The Artist's Way. Actually, I'll just share this as one thing to pass on. The Artist's Way. So this lady was an artist, but she was an alcoholic, I think, as well. And then when she stopped drinking, she found the creativity disappeared and she got into a bit of a funk and she couldn't get her creative flow going. So she started this practice where every morning she'd write 3 foolscap pages and it would just be stream of consciousness. So some days she'd wake up and she'd say, "Oh, I've nothing to write about." So she'd just write that. My mind is telling me I've nothing to write about. And then the next thought would come and she'd just write that. And she'd just write for 3 pages, close the book, not reread it, nothing else. And this became the practice. And so I've had people with every type of traumatic background, all sorts of stuff, and doing this for 3 months every morning. Take 20 minutes, write for 3 pages, just dump whatever's on your mind, and it's like turning on a dirty tap, and it spits out the dirty water, and then you get to the clean stuff. So you're just emptying your mind in the morning, and that will help you to be honest with yourself, because all your stuff will keep coming up. Like it'll just keep coming up. I'm not happy in my job. I'm not happy, whatever it might be, So the morning pages, it's called. That's a great practice worth looking at. And then I suppose one more is just the power of breath. Look into functional breathing. We breathe, the breath is the link between the body and mind. We talked a lot about body and mind today. If you're not breathing well, and it's very simple stuff, but if you're not breathing well, you're putting yourself in a stress state all the time. And when you're in a stress state, your world is not going to look safe and you're going to get caught in a cycle. So if you can improve your breathing, you'll improve your thinking. So those two tools, morning pages and breath work.
I spoke to a breath work expert on the podcast and they said something really profound. They said that the breath is the only essential function of the body that can be controlled. And I was like, wow, I never thought of it like that, So it makes you think, because it sounds to me like it can control a lot of things in your body, your mood, your temperament, all those different things. So
sure.
Good, great advice, man. Thank you. Just before you go, what's next for you and where can people find you?
I have been getting quite into body work. So again, kind of an effort to look at the body in terms of mental health. So I'm doing a lot of deep tissue body work for emotional release. So I'm studying a lot of that. I'm running a men's program in the next couple of months called the Masculine Leadership Program. So that's masculineleadershipprogram.com. And just doing corporate work and coaching and a bunch of other things. But patdivilly.com is the best place to find me.
Perfect. Pat, this has been exactly as I thought, and it turns out I have to say to all the listeners and all the people that have pointed us together, thank you. You were right.
Yeah, thank you. I've really enjoyed it. It's been great, man. Thank you.
Me too. Thank you, mate.